All right, so we're going to set up Unity today, and I want to open up my Unity program right here. And we're going to take a look in here, and depending on which game you're working on, you have different versions. I'm just going to open up 8.302F, F2, I'm sorry. And what I want to show you is how you do a new one. I mean, I have a crap one right here that if I click on it, it'll just open it up. If you have a pre-made file, which I'm going to show you how to make it sit in that directory, it'll open it up for you. If you don't, then you may need to make a new one. Like this one is what I called crap, just to test something out here. Let's just start a new one and go from there. So I'm going to say File, I'm going to say New Project, and I'm going to name it, let's see, Texture, I can spell, Texture Tiles Testbed. Okay, for me. So I'll open up a new one. It's going to all do this, and what it does is it loads up all the files necessary to open a game up. Okay, to make this work, you're going to have to do a few things. The first thing we're going to do is, like I said, make this new one, and what I'll do is pause it while it's building it. Okay, and after it's done building in the environment, it pops up like this. Now, this is exactly what it'll look like when you work on it for another, well, I should say, you may not have this up or this up. All these things in Unity can be modified and made original. I think that the way the original, when you first started up, it looked kind of like this. You could have this over here too, so who knows. But let's talk about what we see inside of here. So assets, that's what builds in the game. If you put anything in here, that's what's going to get looked at to be built in the game. If it's not active in the hierarchy, it's not going to build it, but this is where you put everything for the game. Inspector will look at anything that you bring in. So right now I have sample scene, and that's what this is right here. And if I click on it, the inspector shows me some information. There's not much because there's not much to it. And the hierarchy, it shows me the main camera and the direction light. So I have those things set up. What we want to do is import or set up, well, let's do this first. Let's set up our file structure, because this is a file structure you will want to have, that I want you to have for the game, and it's going to be set up for all art folders. So inside the asset, the basic asset thing, we're going to go ahead and right click in here and say create and then folder. And we're going to name this art assets. And then we're going to go inside of there. Now everything we bring in that's going to be dealing with art, or 90% of it, will go into here. There's some other things that go across different boundaries, so we'll leave it out there. UI may not actually be in the art assets folder, but this is the 3D and all the textures and everything like that, and probably the particle systems. So I'm going to say, again, create new folder, because what I want to do is make a folder for each of the asset types I'm bringing in. So this first part is going to be environment, like that. And then inside of environment, I'm going to go down one more step, and inside of environment, I'm going to make two more folders. I'm going to make materials, and make sure you put the S on the end of materials, and create a new folder called textures. Okay. Each of these, if you couldn't guess, is where the textures and materials are going to go. If it's good if you keep them in the same place as geometry, so you don't have to do a full search for where everything is hidden. And it's all organized, and it's just the way that I've organized it whenever I've worked at places. Now this first folder where it says environment is actually where we're going to put all the meshes. So we could even have broke it down more, but I'm just going to leave the meshes here, and then when we make a mesh, it's going to, or bring a mesh in or make one, it's going to want to have a texture and a materials folder in the same place. Okay, so it's that simple. Now suppose you want to do for characters, after you do the first one, and everybody should do this, by the way, after you do the first one, you want to right click and say, oh, crap. All right, it's itching. What I'll do is go up to art assets, and I like to do it here. I'll click on this, control, and drag a copy of it down. And then I'm going to change this one right here to characters. So now I have a characters folder and an environment folder. We could do other ones too. We could say copy this, control and drag. And I think duplicate is what it is if you want to use the shortcuts. And then this one's going to be, let's say FX. So things like that. Characters can also have things like animation in it, another folder for animation. And we'll talk to the animation department and see how they set it up or how they want it set up. But for our purposes, we only care about the environment and the characters. So that said, now we can start importing stuff into the game, into the to the setup, and then into the game further from that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go outside of here into my Windows directory real quick, and I'm going to go ahead and grab Pennington test case for this one. Assets, art assets, environments. I made a geometry folder, but like I said, we're not going to do that this time. So I'm going to do walls and floor FBX, and I'm going to actually copy, I'm just going to grab walls and floor FBX and drag it straight into the environment folder, just like that. And look, it just made a new one for me. If I come into textures, you'll see I have a bunch of textures. Let me change this to the list view. I'm going to grab them all and throw them into textures folder. And I can open this up and take a look, and you'll see it's importing stuff. So what you're seeing here is part of the stuff you see. If I look inside of my textures folder now, you're going to see there isn't those extra files that we were loading in. What extra files am I talking about? I'm talking about these things called metas. This is what the engine uses when it builds something in the game. Now, it doesn't show up in the game, but it does show up in the master file folder. Okay, so we're going to come back out of here and see what happened when I drop that in there. Now the materials folder is lifted up and built up with all this stuff too. So there's these set materials, and that's because I made this object with those materials. So I'm going to go back to environment, and I'm going to go back to my list up here, and I'm going to go back to geometry. And I'm going to grab dead space around the hall and just throw it in here too. Okay. So what have I done? Well, if you look at this with a little arrow, I brought this geometry in here, and if I click on this, you'll see that's the geometry we're talking about. And if I look at the other one, you'll see it's just this dead space with a hole in it just about the size of the other geometry. If you want, you can control, I believe, and pop it. Oh, that closes it. Let me see. I think it's double click. Well, you can pop it out. I rarely use it that way, but all right. So what am I doing? How does that work for us? Well, that's the thing. Anything we bring in here, it's going to be named. And I want to show you something real quick, just to be clear. I can name something in here, floors, and change it to floors like that. So it's now walls and floors instead of walls and floor. And if I come up to here and look at it in here, all of a sudden, if I say F5 maybe, that is silly. Usually, oh, it's because I'm in the wrong folder. Because what I was looking in is this game. We are now in, if we look up here, texture tile test bed. So it's right here. I go down to assets. I go down to art assets. I go down to environments, and there it is. And look, it's walls and floors. It's not just walls and floor. So I'm going to take this up here and change it back to walls and floor, like that. If I come in here, oh, it's changed in here. The point is, you can make changes to either place, and it will change for both of them. You can move things. If you're going to move things, though, you want to move them inside of here. If I want to move this to a different folder, I want to move it inside of Unity, because that way Unity will track it, and it makes it a lot easier, because wherever it may be tied to, if it moves, it may have a dance. But if you do it inside of Unity, you should be fine. All right, so what I'm going to do is take this object that we have here, and I'm going to throw it in just in this area here, and it should put it in the world like it did. Now, it didn't put it to 0, 0, 0, so 0, 0, 0. Okay, and then if I look at this, and this is the camera view, it's obviously in the wrong spot, so I'm going to turn it over here like that, and then I'm going to say 8 actually. And then what I'll probably do is just do a 360 on it. So let's just do 180, I mean, like that. Now it's facing the world. Okay, this is what you're all going to set up for building your textures in your environments. The last thing I'm going to do is take this dead space around hull and throw it into the scene. And again, it doesn't quite fit, but that's because it's not at 0. I've set it up so 0, 0. And now, lo and behold, it fits perfectly in that box for us. Okay. So let's take a look at what this is. If I click on this environment object that I just dragged in there, it shows up like this. And it has all these textures on it, all these shaders on it. We're going to talk about how I set these shaders up, or how I want you to follow the same rule for setting the shaders up. But actually, this has one extra one we aren't going to use. But and let me show. Well, we'll adjust that in a minute. So what it's saying is that each of these shaders actually is connected to one of these objects in here, or one of the edges of this face. So let me turn off the grid here, get that out of the way. Okay. So what happens though is whenever you bring an object into Unity, it gives you these predefined textures or materials. We don't want that. So yours may look like this, and that's fine. We're going to jump over to materials, and we're going to change that from embedded to external materials. I just like when we're doing the external ones better. It doesn't change anything if I come up here and click on walls and floors. It's now there. They're still the same, but now I can actually change some texture stuff on them. So back wall, top and bottom is what we're going to ignore, and we're going to come in here to textures. And that's one of the problems with clicking, is it will change that. So here's what I do to fix that problem, because every time I click something, it's going to change. What it sees over there is I come up here and push this little lock button. And if I want to see the inspector, whatever I've selected to, I need to go to Add Tab and then add another Inspector tab. And then I can just drag this tab so it's duplicated, kind of like you saw when I started. But now, even when I click on these, I'm going to see what I'm looking at, but the master one won't change. So I'm looking for changing the textures on these. And these names are just rough names for testing purposes. So when you get to them, we'll hopefully have better names for you. But let's see, Desert Tile, which is your base color. And we will throw it. All right, so what we have here is the ability to just take this color and drag it onto this area here that says albedo. Bam. And then it changes the background color. Now, what it doesn't look like it's working right, that's because partially it's not lit correctly. So I'm going to grab this light. And this light by default is a, if you look at it, it's a directional light. So all I really need to do, I don't even need to move it. I'm going to move it just to keep it out of the way, but I just need to aim it in the right direction. Okay. Then we'll move it up. Okay. So now I've got everything showing up. And if I look at this wall texture, it looks fine, but maybe it's too small. But let's just put all the other textures in there. So we see metallic. What we'll try and do is make sure they all say the right names on it. But this one says roughness, so we're going to throw roughness on there. And then we're going to turn down the smoothness on it so it doesn't give us that super highlight. We're going to take this normal. Did I do the right one? No, I didn't. This is the height. This is the roughness, and here's your output normal. So if I throw normal on here, I didn't. But if you get an error that says this is not fixed as normal, fix it. Just go ahead and fix it. Then we're going to take this and we're going to put it up to white, because really that's the color it should be. Okay, so the normal map works great. The spec is still too high, so as I turn this down, we'll start to get decent looking wall stuff. What we want to do next is take a look at the scale of these tiles. These tiles are great, except they're too tiny. So how do we fix that? Well, the cool thing is we have emission controls here. I think we also have an occlusion map too, so we can throw that on there and pop these out a little bit more. But right now they're too tiny. So if I just say 0.5, tab 0.5, now I've got better tiles. And then we can start to see how they look in the game. Okay, so we're going to do that for every piece here, and I'll probably just do it in fast motion here. I'm actually going to change this one so they'll look the same. You're only going to have 6 and not 7, so we're going to have a separate wall back, top, bottom right now. So I'll put this in height. normal, and then I'll speed this up from now on. Okay, so that's kind of what we're going to do. You're going to build all of those. Let me turn this camera gizmo 3D icon off. Okay. You're going to build all these levels, but you're going to have to come through and texture them now that we are to that point. So I'm going to change this to 1.5, I mean. And maybe turn this down a little bit more. There. Okay. So now, I still don't think that back wall is low enough, so I'm going to put a 2.5 in front of that. 2. And that means, of course, because I got this still broken, you won't have to do this part. 2. Okay. So that means now we have this all laid out. And what we need, last thing we need to do, and this is where you're going to check the textures. So this is where Kimberly's checking her textures, and we're looking at them, and we'll talk about them, all of us. But for now, what I need to do is make a human, because we want to know where the camera's going to be. We want to know where all the information we can, so we can get an idea of how the game's going to look. So what we do is we come up and we say game object, and we say create 3D object cube, and then you'll see it says this cube, I can turn this lock off now, this cube is 1 by 1 by 1, well, by 1, and we want this to be 2, because our character is 2 meters high, and okay, so we're going to take this, which is now our human height, and we're going to drag it down to the ground. Like that. We're going to move it over so it's in the center of the path so we know exactly where it is. Now, the cool thing is, we know that's the size of our character, about. What we want to do now is have this main camera exactly lined up to it. So the easiest way to do that is, actually, let me make sure this is position 0, 0. Interesting. Okay. And 0. Okay. So, what is this one at? Huh? Okay, apparently I have the center point in the wrong spot. Okay, so now I've got it to 0, 0, 0. And the reason I'm doing that is because I want to do two things. I want to put the camera at 0, 0, 0 as well. So I'm going to see the transform position of the camera as 0, and then I'm going to say 0, and then I'm going to say 0, and you'll see it's right inside of the character. That's perfect. That's what we want. That works great. I'm not worried about it's facing the right direction and everything. You can see me floating there. So what I want to do now is put the main camera inside of the cube. And if you want, we can rename this cube. Well, it didn't go inside of it, but we can rename this cube player so we know what we're looking at when we see that cube. I'm going to grab this camera and drag it so it's on top of the player like that. And what it does, it nests inside of it. Now, whenever I move the player, it moves the camera position. So that's cool. What it will do is we'll move it back to here. Go down like that. So it's perfect. So it's perfect there. Now the thing that Justin has said is the camera is going to be this way. So if we look at this player, you'll see it says 5, -2, -148. That's fine. We're going to open this up and look at the camera, and you'll see it says 0, 0, 0 because the camera's position is relative now to the character. And Justin has said that the character, oh, not that one, that's 1, a 1 up, and then Z is going to be 8. So now, if you look down here, you can see our character, right? Well, if you go to game, that's the view that we have in the game. Now, one more thing we want to do, and yours doesn't have this up there, but you want to say 2048 by 1536, because that's the resolution in the game. You'll see it only in game, okay? When you see game and scene, there's going to be both. If you don't have game, just right-click and say add tab, and then go to game. Okay, so I'm going to pull this off screen for a second and then drag it back down, because when you drag it inside of here, it always wants to attach. But what we want to do is, what this allows us, or what that number does, is it means that no matter what, it's always going to have the proper aspect ratio, right? So cool, that works. Next thing we want to do, and when you're at home anyway, is you want to measure this out and with a pencil or with a ruler or with a whatever you have to be the correct distance. So you're going to take that tape measure, and what you want is the tablets we're going to be using are 8 inches across, or diagonal. So you just measure 8 inches diagonal, which is about, for me, And I know this is weird because we're working in computers and the real world, but that's just the reason I have us do this is so we can get a real feel for how big the actual environment we're working on is going to be. So it's a little bit smaller, but it's about the right. There we go. Just like that. So now, if you put it in your screen, you can see how big the environment looks. Now, Justin was talking about moving the camera to maybe 9. They're playing with the numbers here, so we can see more. Obviously, the further back it is, the more you see. And don't be don't be deceived by how big that block looks. When you have the character, it looks tiny. And we'll go into that at another time. But for now, that's it. I just want to get you guys to be able to set up your own environment and go from there.